everybody, and welcome to a non-race weekend podcast. This week, we're going to be covering a few news stories that have come out during the week that we thought we should probably cover before the race weekend in Symmons Plains. I'm joined again by Shane. How are you going, Shane?
Good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, I'm going pretty good. So we're covering the centre of gravity changes that they've tried to have incorporated into the Mustangs, and also a couple of new rule changes heading into Symmons Plains. So first off, if you haven't read the articles, obviously they're changing the ballast in the Mustang and the Commodores to try and bring them down to the same levels as the Altimas, which is... It's caused a lot of controversy, obviously, as it would do, with the Mustangs having a bit more ballast at the top in their roof linings, and the Commodores having quite a bit less. But obviously, both of the cars still have the same minimum weight requirements. So, Shane, what have you got to say about this situation?
Well, it's certainly. Well, I don't think it took too many people by surprise when it was announced that there was certainly a decent advantage going to the Mustang. But I guess it still goes back to last week when I said, well, I think for a lot of people, they'll just consider it clever engineering. I think I guess in a way, I've kind of changed my tune a bit from last week. Like, it's not a full retraction, but rather it's a slightly different outlook. Like, I'm not even going to be Roland Dane bashing. Strangely enough, but like, he's only doing what team owners do, like all up and down pit lane, or the team principals. They're just looking out for their own team. It's the same as what you see with coaches in the NRL or the AFL or whatever. They're always going to be the first to kick up a stink if they feel that their team is disadvantaged. I guess kind of what it is though. It's Supercars. What they've sort of tried to do is shut the gate after the horse is bolted, pardon the Mustang pun. But instead, what they've actually done is they've left the gate open, so they've shot the horse, rather than what they should have done is kept the gate closed from the start and had a padlock shut, so none of it could have ever happened. Like last year, because we see that the ZB Commodore has to have a weight penalty as well. It shows that they had the advantage last year over the FGX Falcon and the Altima, and that comes after at least Albert Park, or going into Albert Park last year, where the Falcon and Nissan teams were able to run the composite panels, which certainly evened it up a little bit, but as we see now, it wasn't going to go all the way. And then we see in the off season now the new introduction of the new Mustang. They've obviously gone right over the top as far as designing their car, and they've been able to have a much better center of gravity. And now we've seen that they've had to even it up. I just don't think it should have ever got to that stage. I think perhaps it's something that Supercars should have been looking at from the start.
Yeah, exactly. It also, the most interesting point I found from it was the fact that the Altima, the ZB Commodore, also had to change their center of gravity as well, which was very strange considering they've been running that car for like over a year now, and the other teams had said that it had an advantage there, but they ran that as composite panels, but then it was just still had an advantage. So it's very strange, but obviously the Mustang has more of an advantage from what we can see with the center of gravity being changed quite majorly on that car, which is obviously going to affect its handling on those circuits that are a lot more fast flowing. They're gonna have to really think about the setup and the way that they how they're gonna change that, compensate for those weight in those areas that they aren't really used to, I guess, because they haven't really had that kind of issue before.
Yeah, well, I think circuits like Tasmania, where they're going to be at next weekend, it's probably not going to be a big issue with the short
Yeah.
circuit. There's a lot of slow corners where it's not really going to matter too much. There's a couple of faster ones. So, I guess going into that last sort of loop as they come back around onto the main straight, it might hurt a little bit there. But I think it won't be until we get to places like Barbagallo. It's probably going to be one of the first ones. Of course, Phillip Island will be another big one where you've got a lot of changes of direction one after the other, where it'll hurt more than a lot of other places, even as for street circuits like Townsville. I think we'll have a lot of will disadvantage them as well. But I think if anything, it's not actually a disadvantage. It's just leveled the playing field. So the way Supercars sees it now, everyone will be the same. So I guess now it's just a case of there's no excuses for anyone. If we still see the Mustang come out on top in Tasmania, well, it's just a better car and don't have anything to say about it.
Yeah,
so
that's it.
That'll be the true test if they've made these changes, they've made the call. I guess if we suddenly see the Mustangs mid-pack or lower, then maybe something was wrong on Ford's end, or something they've gone too far, or something like that. Which sort of goes back to what I said earlier. Like, something like this perhaps should have been taken care of a long time ago, like perhaps before the ZB was even released, when they were doing the straight line aero testing and that. Maybe they needed to do a centre of gravity, make sure it's fairly even still amongst all the teams. You don't expect it to be bang on the mark.
Yeah.
But I think if it's within, if they've got a certain margin of error that they can be a little bit better, it's okay. Well, that gives the other teams a chance to catch up. All right, we'll go with that, and then. But yeah, I think we'll wait and see after next weekend.
It's interesting because it kind of brings the parity testing that the Supercars does at the beginning of the season into question. Like, is that testing actually enough? Are they actually covering enough bases with that kind of testing? Maybe they should be looking towards like the kind of testing that the GT3 and the GTE categories do with their BOP testing, where that's covering a lot more manufacturers, but maybe they should be trying to mirror something like that if obviously it's propping up issues throughout the season.
Yeah, I think that's it. Like that's, I think they may not have to cover absolutely everything. I think for the straight line aero testing, that's always been thereabouts, and you're never going to get every team matching the exact same specs down the straight. They'll all have slightly different horsepower because even though it's just the three manufacturers, the various Holden teams, and I think even the two Ford teams, they all have their own engine program, so they're always going to be a little bit higher or lower on horsepower compared to the other teams.
Yeah.
But I think it's like we've seen. I think certainly centre of gravity is probably something that from now on will be monitored. I think it was a bit silly doing it after 2 rounds. There's still, obviously the Mustang was going to have an advantage. Whether it was still going to have that advantage at every race weekend, I don't know if it would have had much advantage for this weekend in Symmons Plains for the same reasons, where it's a short circuit. There's just a few tight corners, a couple of long straights, and then a couple of sweeping corners towards the back end of the circuit.
Yeah, it's interesting because center of gravity is like rarely being brought up before in any kind of testing. It's obviously due to the interesting shape of the Mustang, where it's such a different shape to the other cars, but it's like never been mentioned before in any kind of Supercars testing or whatever. So I wasn't even... No,
it's definitely become the new buzzword for the Supercars teams over the last couple of years.
It's definitely become a buzzword for clickbait as well.
Oh, yeah. As soon as you see a picture of McLaughlin's Mustang, you think, oh, what's this about? And it'll be about centre of gravity.
Yeah. I also just want to talk about the statement that Supercars put out about that centre of gravity testing. Just a little quote. They said, "It was important to note that the constitution of Supercars includes the premise that incoming models must meet the incumbents. The purpose of this is to ensure that those new models do not unduly increase the costs for current teams in pursuit of technical parity. So in real terms, that just means that they're not wanting to have a new car come in and it be so much faster, and then rather than having the teams that are slower, they go, oh, you have to make all these new panels and whatever to match that, and put all this time and money and research into becoming the same level as the faster car. They bring the faster car downwards to meet the slower cars, just to keep that cost down. I think that was an interesting point that Supercars actually brought up then.
Yeah, I think I'll certainly wear that if that's their decision. I know last week during the podcast I said, you can't blame a team or a manufacturer for having a better car. But you should always allow the other teams to catch up. Yeah. If Supercars look at it and say, okay, well, in one way that's fair enough, but would rather everyone stay the same, so we don't increase the cost for all the teams, especially some of the teams that do struggle out there a little bit.
Yeah.
But if that's also the case, then where was that 12 months ago? That would be my point of view, was that there was, and it wasn't just the four teams, like obviously Nissan were quite heavily disadvantaged by that too. So it was like, again, it's kind of like that the horse is already bolted and still trying to shut the gate. So it's like they've just let it get out of control. So hopefully this just ends the debate now, and it's just, okay, we're all on the same page and we can just carry on with racing, and whoever's, I know they ultimately want it to be the best driver will win the championship. So hopefully that just ends up being the case now.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, you think about to the past, the other cars that they've brought in with the new chassis that they obviously developed with the Volvos and the Mercedes. Like, the Mercedes and the Volvos, they weren't as quick as the Holdens and the Holden Commodores and the Ford Falcons at the time. They just weren't as quick. I
think Volvo, they were still quite towards the pointy end. They didn't win a lot of races, but certainly out of the other three manufacturers, Volvo, Nissan, and Mercedes, they were definitely the top of the pole there.
I think it was
compared to Ford and Holden, at least anyway.
I think it was mostly due to McLaughlin's skill and just being able to rag that Volvo up the field all the time.
Absolutely, and you could see that last year with the FGX Falcon. Like, it was never the fastest car on the grid, as far as, like, when you compared it to the other Falcons that were on the grid, he was the only one up there. Even his teammate, who's in the same equipment, he was often only just sort of rounding out the top 10 for a lot of races. So, and Tickford were barely featuring in the top 10 for a lot of the season. So, I agree with you on that. Certainly McLaughlin was just getting the best out of the package, but I think the biggest thing that was letting the other two teams down, and I think it's always let Nissan down from the start, is the aero has always been one of their biggest disadvantages. They just haven't been able to get the right package. Maybe the Altima, just as its overall shape compared to other cars, it might just not be the most aerodynamic car going around. Look, it was never meant to be a sports car. It was always just a family sedan. So building a race car out of that car might have been more difficult than first thought.
Yeah, I don't understand why Nissan didn't just go for something like the GTR to begin with. Like, it would have been much better suited to supercars, even if it is a two-door. Like, obviously we can see now the Mustang is really good as a two-door supercar, but yeah, just when they initially announced it ages ago, obviously, and they said it was an Altima, I was really confused. I'm like, just should have just gone the GTR.
Yeah, I think a lot of people share that same thought, that that's their top tier vehicle. It's the GTR. It's an absolute bullet of a car. I think my worry about it was that it is practically a supercar. Look, it's certainly a cheap supercar compared to the Ferraris and Lamborghinis and everything like that. But it's a car that is well out of the price range for just about every viewer of supercars, where all the other cars that would run in the category, Fords and Holdens, they were always something that everyone could afford. Even the Mercedes, like, yeah, that's an expensive car, but yeah, you might not be able to afford an AMG E63, but you'd be able to get something close to it.
Yeah, the non-AMG version, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And so maybe for this and maybe something like the 370Z might have been a bit closer, because that's something at least that more would have been able to afford. And I think given then, like, knowing how fast the GTR is, it probably would have been faster than the supercar version anyway. So
yeah,
it probably just would have looked weird having a race car slower than the road going version.
Yeah, it's like what they have in the GT3 categories. They have a couple cars where, due to their BOP, their top speed has actually been limited. So something like the Bentley and the Audi have both got limited top speed. So the Bentley, its road going version can do a ridiculous speed, and then the GT3 version can only go up to like 275 or something. I'm not quite sure, but it's not as fast as the road going version. So yeah, it is weird.
Yeah, that's it. And then of course you always got to have that little bit of extra aero on the car anyway, with the front, especially the rear wing. That's always cause a lot of drag and slow it down as well anyway. So I think, but I think that's probably one of the main reasons, is that supercars has always been a category for like everyday sedans. Like, that's like where it got its beginnings, was everyday sedan, turned into race cars. Let's go racing, and it's slowly developed. Like, they've become a lot more purpose built over the years, and now they just purely are purpose built cars. They don't share too many features apart from looks with the road car. The badge is about the only thing that you could walk into a dealership and buy the same thing. I think I even seen that the headlights and the tail lights aren't factory parts. They've got to make their own, which is bizarre. I'm not sure what the difference is there, but maybe it's just more of a financial penalty on them, so they don't bust as many against the car in front or something like that.
Just after the Melbourne race, it was announced that they were going to get rid of time certain races in supercars, which we briefly talked about in the last podcast. But obviously that's going to be coming into effect for the next few rounds. So obviously that's something that we'll have to be looking out for in Tasmania, which has a bit of a history of causing some massive crashes like a few years ago. But onto Tasmania, we've only got 2 races over the weekend, with the first race being 50 laps and 120 kilometres, and then the second race being 84 laps, which is 200 kilometres around the very short circuit. So the drivers might feel a little bit dizzy after doing 84 laps.
Yeah, I've always quite enjoyed Tasmania. I think it's kind of got a little bit of a lakeside feel to it, where it's a very small circuit, but it's still very fast, and you still see some really good racing. Like, you look at it on paper, you think it's just more or less a couple of little corners, couple of straights, and a hairpin. What good could come of that? But we've always seen that drivers, especially if you're trying to work your way up through the field, if qualifying didn't go well for you, it's just a cracking little circuit. We see them try and pass into turn 2. It rarely works out, but you like to see them have a go.
Yeah. And
then of course the hairpin, and then even up the back of the back straight, you'll see them, if they can get a good launch out of the hairpin, you'll see them pass there. So, like, strangely for a circuit that doesn't look like much when you just see the outline of it, it's over the years it's always had some really great racing there. And of course we've seen when the weather turned a bit nasty a couple of years ago, it seemed to end the days for most of for a lot of the drivers in the field, where I think something like 12 or 13 cars were caught up in it, and I think for a couple of them that ended their weekend.
Yeah, it's still terrifying, some of those onboards where you just see them like skating off the side and just smashing into people.
Yeah, you wouldn't even know, especially, like, as they say, always with the spray, you can't see past your bonnet, so it just would have been, all of a sudden there's a couple of brake lights, hang on, that's not right, and then bang, you're into a whole bunch of other cars. So it was certainly one of the bigger incidents we've seen in supercars over the years.
So last year, the Red Bull cars were pretty fast there. We had Jamie Whincup won the first race with Craig Lowndes in second, and then James Courtney. And then in the second race on the Sunday, it was Lowndes, and then McLaughlin, then Whincup. And Van Gisbergen was basically nowhere to be seen all weekend. Yep, no, he's nowhere to be seen all weekend, basically, during the races. So potentially we could see Red Bull actually bringing the challenge to the Mustangs. Hopefully we do, considering that they've implemented those changes with the center of gravity. So really, this is one of Red Bull's strongest circuits, so hopefully we'll actually see them getting up there.
Yeah, I think as we touched on earlier again too, because it is sort of just a couple of straights, and it's not really an aero-dependent circuit. It's not a lot that you would do for setup that would give you a huge advantage. So I think it's always been one of those really good equalising circuits. So it could even be one where we see Brad Jones Racing right up there. Like, they've had a really good start to the season, so there's no reason why they can't go on with it there. Like, if they do have any, any slight issues that they might have had last year compared to the likes of the Red Bull Racing and DJR Team Penske, a lot of those have been equalised out, especially on Triple Eight's side of things with the Twin Springs gone.
Yeah,
that'll be something that's still talked about for a little while yet until they get their head right around that.
Yeah.
So I think Brad Jones could be the surprise package of the weekend. I think even Erebus, I think they've. I did read something earlier in the week where they've made a couple of little changes to their suspension, so they might. I think it was their suspension, but it was. I thought that might bring them back up towards the top, because they weren't bad in Albert Park, but they normally we would expect them to be a lot further up,
especially
challenging for the race wins.
Especially considering their early pace throughout the Adelaide weekend. They had Anton Di Pasquale especially had really good pace straight from the get-go, but then just couldn't convert that into race results. Yeah,
well, he had. He's not a bad driver, Anton. He's still only young, so he's still got to have those inconsistencies throughout the odd race weekend here and there. So I think if he can, he would have found a bit of confidence from being able to qualify well back in Adelaide. He's had some pretty decent races. He might be able to put it together here. I think realistically, it'll be David Reynolds will be the one flying the flag for Erebus if they were to have a good weekend. We've seen last year, he was able to get the absolute most out of that car when it was there and working well for him. He got behind the main top two teams. He got the most race wins from any other driver. He got quite a few podiums last year. So I think if they can find their feet a bit, did look a little bit lost over the first two rounds, but I think if they can find their feet again, they should be back up the pointy end, and Tasmania might be where it starts.
Yeah, we've got 3-part qualifying sessions for both of those races on the Saturday and the Sunday. So it's elimination qualifying for those qualifying sessions. They're each 10 minutes long, so high intensity, and it's going to be a lot of traffic on that circuit for that first 10-minute session, just trying to get in there. And obviously another factor into that equation is going to be the fact that the Parc Ferme rules come into effect for between qualifying and the race, so the teams can't change anything in between the qualifying and the race, besides from basically just tyres and fuel. And they can obviously service the cooling aids for the driver as well, just so obviously the driver doesn't melt during the race. But yeah, not much that they can do. Still more than F1 can do, I think, but still not very much.
Yeah, well, it's probably, I think it'll certainly give a chance for the racing to be spiced up. I think. Given the qualifying results, it's going to be one of those things of, do you take the gamble and go for a full race setup? Hopefully you can just get everything out of it and still hopefully qualify towards the front, or will you just go for glory, go for a lot more of a qualifying trim, get the car on the front couple of rows and then hopefully hang on throughout the race, which would be unlikely. But again, you got like a track like Symmons Plains, like we said, overtaking is kind of limited. You've only realistically got the hairpin, and that's about it.
Yeah.
So it might be harder to overtake there than we think. So I wouldn't be surprised if a couple of those mid-pack teams went for a little bit of glory and just tried to set it up a little bit more like a qualifying car would.
Yeah.
And maybe find themselves up in the top 5, maybe even a little bit higher again, and that would certainly shake it up. I think the way I read it was that they can still make changes through qualifying though, so that might mean that we see a very busy track in the first few minutes where they all come out with as much qualifying trim as they can, that they can still swap back by the end of the session, go out, maybe do one little lap just to make sure everything's all screwed down nicely, and then call it a day. And then they've still got sort of like they'll have a qualifying trimmed car and a race trimmed car. I don't know how much you get done in quick little sessions like that. It'd be a few things. Yeah, that's it. So there's probably not a lot you could do. Like maybe like a quick little ride height adjustment, or there'll be a few small things. Maybe you might take a little bit of wing off for the first part or something like that. That'll be about it. It'll be small changes, but I think again that would just increase the excitement of how much teams are willing to gamble on that first lap. And if that gets ruined, then they've got to try and get it back to a bit more of a race set for the next part for their next lap if they can squeeze it in, and then they still might be down the back anyway. So I think it's probably a good thing. I think but it's only a trial at this stage, from what I believe. So I think we'll have to wait and see if they actually bring it in full time.
Yeah, I was also thinking it's going to be a little bit hard to patrol that, because obviously when they have Parc Ferme, they put those big cardboard things on top of the cars, so that all the scrutineers and everything know that they're in Parc Ferme. But the fact that cars are going to be eliminated in that first session and then that second session as well, and there's only like 5 minutes between those sessions or so, it's going to be really difficult for all the marshals and everything to actually watch that and make sure they aren't doing any changes to the car kind of thing. And you also got to wonder how harsh that punishment is going to be for them, whether they'll implement the normal Parc Ferme rules. Hopefully they do, just so that all of the teams know what's going on. But also, I think as you were saying, a few teams might actually go for it with the full qualifying setup. But then what ends up happening, obviously, is you get a pretty squirmish car going into the race where it's really just a go for blow kind of car. And it's just going to be interesting whether the tyres actually last. They probably won't last as much as those that have done like a more race kind of setup. So that's obviously Tasmania isn't massively reliant on tyres, but it's still going to obviously have an effect on them. So it'll be interesting to see what the strategies during the race for the pit stops and the tyres are that play out for those that do like a more qualifying trim.
Yeah, that's it. And we've even seen over the years as well that teams will make small ride height adjustments, and there are a few things they can do during the race, especially when they're putting on fuel and they've got that 15 odd seconds or more to make a couple of very quick changes. So there might be those small things that you might see them carry a couple of extra qualifying bits on. They might still have to start the race with their qualifying ride height, but then they're able to, at that first pit stop, they'll still go out kind of light, come in early, fill the car full of fuel, and then make a couple of quick little adjustments. We might see that early, but I think if it is brought in full time, I think teams will get their strategies sorted out. They'll know where to go, and then you'll start to see a lot less of that action. I think at first there'll be a little bit of trial and error, especially. I think the top teams, you won't see much out of them because they'll just want to be, just take it as easy as they can, not take too many gambles because they're going to be playing for a championship. I think the teams down towards the back a lot more, I think they're the ones that are going to be a lot more keen to take a gamble and just see what can happen because if it means they can jag a top 10 in qualifying when they wouldn't have otherwise been there, then they're going to do it. if it means that they might end up having a better race than they otherwise would have, they're going to have a crack at it too. Especially if it also the weather in Tasmania can also be a little bit up and down.
Yeah.
So you just never know.
It's a bit like switching from like you just said, switching from like a wet weather setup to a dry setup. It's obviously not as dramatic as that, but it's got a bit of just for a bit of an example so people know what it's kind of like.
That would be the interesting one though, is if qualifying was raining, and then the race, a couple of hours later was going to be fine. The track would dry out. Like the support categories do a pretty good job of getting rid of the water. Would they be allowed to make changes in between that? I didn't see anything written about that. I'm assuming that they've got contingencies in place, or maybe it's just that we play it as it lies. You've got to still take the track in your full wet weather setup. So. Again, it might be a case of like teams are looking at the radar going, well, it's pouring down now, but the race is expected to be dry. All right, we're just going to have to go with the dry weather setup. It's going to handle like a skateboard on ice, but it's you're just going to have to put up with it. Or again, the other way around again too is if it's dry and qualifying, but they're expecting rain. But we know what happens with rain; it can be either there or it's not. So they might think, it's supposed to pour down. We're looking at the radars, big rain coming in, and then it doesn't show up, and you've actually tried to set a car up to be comfortable in the wet, and it's not there. All of a sudden, you haven't got a very good car for the race. So I think with variable weather, I think we'll see. That's where the teams will have to get their thinking caps on in terms of setup.
Yeah, it'll also be interesting to see whether they apply this trial for the Parc Ferme rules in a circuit that's longer than Tasmania, because obviously Tasmania is quite a short circuit, so the qualifying lap is pretty short, so it doesn't have such a massive effect on the setup as it would if for example, if we went to Phillip Island and they trialed this. Obviously it's going to have a lot bigger effect on the car.
Yeah, well, I think I would still like to see, certainly at places like Bathurst, for the top 10 shootout, or anywhere where we have a top 10 shootout, that the teams that are in that top 10 can still set their car up with a qualifying trim, because that's when you really want to see them go for it. Like if they do have Parc Ferme rules in, you're not going to see Scott McLaughlin set a 203 around Bathurst again. Yeah. You just won't see that. They're going to be up around their race pace, which is still very fast compared to what it was a few years ago. But we're not going to see lap records have a chance to fall. I think so. I think at least for the top 10 shootouts that we have, and we do have a few more than what we used to a few years ago. I think certainly the top 10, let them just go hell for leather, trim the car out as much as they want for speed for that one lap, and then but bring it back to that pre top 10 spec.
Yeah.
Obviously they'd have to take note of where all the various setups were in terms of ride height, suspension, everything like that. But I think, like I said, for qualifying, you want to see him go flat out.
Yeah, it'd be a bit weird seeing a top 10 shootout at Bathurst where they just have their race set up and they're only setting like 204s or 205s or something. It'd be a bit strange.
Yeah, that's it. You will probably never see those lap records get broken, at least not anytime soon. So I think, that would be the better way to go.
Righto, so that just about sums up this podcast. Have you got any closing comments for us, Shane?
I'm just looking forward to this weekend mostly. I think it'd be interesting to see how much has closed in on between the teams. We might even see Kelly Racing find their way a bit further up north on the grid than what we have the first two rounds. But I think certainly for the centre of gravity thing, I think it's still, even though we hope that it puts an end to the debate now, and we can just see good, clean, even racing. But I think it's still probably going to be something that rages on. Like if the four teams have a bad day out and they don't qualify well, and they're not able to make their way up through the field, throughout the course of the race, they're going to be blowing up. Say, oh, hang on, now we had a good car, they slowed us down, they've gone too far, but then the next race they could come out and dominate again. You just never know. So I think it's something that'll roll on all year, but I guess it's going to add to the excitement again.
It's also be something that we'll probably hear in the Facebook comments for a long time as well.
Oh yeah, look forward to seeing some of those.
Well, thank you very much for joining me today, Shane.
No worries, mate.
And we hope you all enjoy Tasmania. We'll see you after then. Bye.